And just a reminder too that we are using the book I had mentioned last week, which is Unselfie by Michelle Borba, Why Empathetic Kids Succeed in All About Me World. And so again, if you don't have the book, I think it's worth getting. It really is a great read, and we're covering a lot of different areas, but there's much more in the book itself too. So, so I'm going to begin this week with kind of distinguishing a few key terms here. I think this is really important to kind of consider as we go forward with this particular lesson today. And the three terms we're going to talk about are altruism, kindness, and charity. I want to make kind of clear right off the bat that all three of those are really, really important areas that I think are good for our kids to understand and develop. But we want to kind of distinguish a little bit between altruism and those other two. And so when we think about altruism, and Jamie will talk much more about this today, we think about the sense of obligation, the sense of responsibility that we have towards others. And as we're developing this with our kid, it's just a sense of kind of a responsibility to humanity and vice versa that we really want to kind of impart to them and how they go forward. And I think one of the keys here is that empathy, again, we talked about empathy before, but that sense of really trying to put yourself in another person's shoes is really what underlies that framework of being altruistic. In contrast, a little bit, kindness is great, but kindness is kind of the idea of doing things more for the civility of it, more for the sense of being nice, which again is something we need to teach our kids, but it doesn't necessarily reach over to the other side and really understand the context of where the other person is coming from or that sense of responsibility. And in the same way, we often think about charity as giving to other people of our time, talent, and treasure, which is something we surely want to encourage. But I think oftentimes when we think of charity, we also think of the idea of sympathy, right? We feel sorry for someone, so we give them whatever, even if we feel like they need, instead of necessarily the idea of empathy, which underlies that idea of altruism, which is our sense of responsibility to others. So at the end of the day, as we talk about altruism today, you can think about it this way: is that it's great to do good things and for our kids to do good things, to be kind, to give to others. But even better than doing things is the sense of who our kids are becoming. And I can think of it, just as a father myself, we're continually trying to encourage our kids to understand and think very much about who are you becoming and just who do you want to become there. So I'm going to hand off a little bit to Jamie here to kind of talk about developing an ethical code and the idea of a moral identity.
Well, Jim, you've definitely given us, I think, all something to think about because, like you said, we all, I think, want to or strive to do all of those things, but kind of the way we think about what they mean in a broader sense, not only for us, but for our kids, is something that I think doesn't get quite as much attention, maybe. And so we are going to talk about kind of this idea of a moral identity and how it relates to this idea of empathy. As we talked about last week, empathy is this idea that we are wanting to take another person's perspective. And it starts with emotional literacy, the ability to identify emotions in oneself, in others. But the next step is, what do you do with those emotions? And it's important for kids and adults, everybody, to have values and guiding principles to which they apply their knowledge of emotions. If I'm feeling sad, what does that tell me about the world around me? How does it relate to the values and who I want to be? Do you remember, if you think back to being a child, did anybody ever teach you how to have a moral identity? Did they teach you ethical codes? You learn right and wrong. We all do. You get in trouble when you hit your brother, or you're told not to steal because it's not nice, or it's not right, it's wrong. But moral development is more of something that we all learn, and kids learn it through very specific developmental processes that I could get into, but it doesn't matter for this. But essentially, we can help our kids develop a moral code regardless of where their moral development lies by the way that we talk to them. So there's Dr. Borba talks about kind of this epidemic of overpraised kids. And I believe she's talking about my generation. They're adults now, they're in the workforce. And she cites some really interesting research that that like CEOs and business executives are having a really hard time managing millennials because of this intense need for praise for everything. And I mean, I think I'm probably guilty of this a little bit too. Constantly needing like, oh, I did this early, not on time. Like, what do I get? Um, and she really attributes this to this idea of overpraising. It can cause our kids to see themselves as more important than others simply because of the way that we're talking about them. Um,
It's interesting as you talk about this, Jamie. I think one of the challenges is for all of us parents sitting here is we want our kids to feel a sense that they are special to us, right? Whatever word we use is what it used, but a sense that they are clearly unique, they're loved in very clear ways. But at the same time, like you're describing here, it's like sometimes I say to my kids, it's like you are special, but not more special than the other person, right? And I think that's the challenge is like navigating that world in the sense of I do need to praise my kids so that they're aware of the things they're doing well and they're aware that I'm paying attention to it. But as you get to a certain point, if they start to expect it and they need it and they like over desire it, then it kind of takes on a life of its own that can be difficult there.
yeah, I think that life of its own is really the key here is that it's not that the kids are actively saying, I know I'm better than everyone else, but it's more like, well, I've always been treated like my needs come before everybody else's. So I'm confused now why I can't take a 4-month vacation or whatever. That's an extreme example, but some of the examples she provides is that 1/3 of college students feel they deserve at least a B in class just for showing up, which I think too, if I told my parents that, they would be like, shocked, um, because that was not the case when they were in college, that's for sure. Um, so all of this to just kind of lay the groundwork that what we can do now is when we have young kids and we think about the way we're talking about them, we still know praise is the number one way to affect behavior. It's the easiest, quickest, most appropriate way to shape behavior. Research shows that. But so we don't want to get rid of praise. What we want to do is change the way we're praising our kids rather than telling them that they are what's good. We want to tell, or not, sorry, that their behavior was good. We want to tell them that they are good. So an example is, I'm proud of you for winning. That's basically saying what you did was good, you won, versus saying you were so kind to your friend, you're a kind friend, or you're a good friend.
And what I like about that too is that there's also another kind of related area of research that says we want to focus on effort-based praise, right? Which
Mm-hmm.
is something like, again, winning is kind of an outcome, right? Winning can be something that we all desire, but we can't control. And in many ways, it takes us too focused on that. Whereas, like you said, when you describe that idea of how you like the way that they treated another person, it relates to the effort that they put forth in that interaction there. And I think that is a really huge key is the sense of you're developing that moral identity around the effort they're putting forward. Because even if that child had come back to them in a negative way, right? So that outcome wasn't great, that they tried to do something nice, the child didn't accept it. We would still say to our child, hey, but you did a great thing because your effort was in the right place. I think that's a key there.
Right. And it's a really hard shift. I was trying to think as I was working through some examples for today, I was trying to think, okay, character based praise versus behavior based praise. What might that look like, especially for a parent? So in my head, I'm thinking, okay, the kid picks up their laundry the first time you ask them. All parents want that, right? And you may say, thank you so much for picking up your laundry. Oh my gosh. Dr. Fraser would say, excellent, specific praise. You did it immediately, exactly the way we like it. But we might say, well, we're praising the behavior. They put the laundry away. We might even want to say, oh, thank you so much for listening to mommy. Again, very specific. The child knows exactly what they did, but we're still praising the behavior. Maybe instead, we could say, you are so kind because you are keeping your room clean and that's safe for everybody. Or, you're keeping your room clean and that makes you an excellent, that makes you a kind person, or that makes you willing to help others because mom couldn't clean today, or whatever it is. You're praising their character. not the behavior. And it's hard. I'm like sitting here thinking like, oh my gosh, I just want to say thank you for listening. Listening is great, but what else can you say? Not every single time it's going to work, but it's a way to kind of shift the way you're thinking about how you talk to your kids.
Yeah, and in the end of the day, of course, like we talked last week, we all have to give ourselves grace as parents. That none of this, of course, we're going to do every time or perfectly, and that's not what it's about. But I think as parents, in the same way we're developing this idea for kids, like in cultivating empathy, what we're really striving towards as parents is to be more and more intentional about the things that we do, right? And being intentional, it's having kind of a basis for which we're doing this, right? So it's like thinking to yourself, what kind of character am I encouraging with my kids by the way that I speak to them? One of the other things about praise that can be a little complicated, we describe the idea of saying, what if I said, my kid repeatedly is, you're so smart, or you're so pretty, whatever else like that. Again, as a parent myself, I recognize sometimes that's spontaneously there. And in the end of the day, there's nothing horribly wrong. But if we repeatedly tell our kids that they're so smart, so smart, so smart, and that's not something they really can control, and they have the effort, they can work hard to do well and have the character, which is, we would say, being conscientious at school and things like that. But we can kind of get in a danger zone where we're describing something that they're afraid, like being smart, that later on when challenges come their way and they're like, ooh, but if I take a chance and I fail, am I so smart still? We don't want to, kind of cultivate that. And so I think the whole conversation around praise really is to say, when you encourage your kids, what kind of aspects in themselves and what kind of effort are you most wanting to encourage? And when you do that, it helps you think more easily, like, oh yeah, I want to encourage a sense of this kind of, identity. And that's where we're going.
Yeah, and I think you nailed it right there. And one of the things that Dr. Borba kind of presents as a way to do this, and maybe helpful to think in the forefront of your mind, is to change the verb or the yeah, so you might say thank you for cleaning, right? And cleaning is a verb. That's what you're telling them. Thank you for doing this thing. But change it into a noun. So maybe you say you're a helper and you are a great helper, or you're a hard worker. Instead of thanks for working hard on your homework, you say you are a hard worker and you get things done, or you try your best every single time we sit down to do homework. So rather than saying you did your homework, you tried, you did it. And interestingly, this idea of an altruistic personality kind of comes out to emerge in kids. What Dr. Borba is saying is that the way we talk to our kids and how they internalize those values is based on a sense of social responsibility and caring that came from their parents. That's what the research continues to show. And I think it's pretty clear that if we as parents are emphasizing this idea of caring and social responsibility, our kids are internalizing that. Not always. We can't always do this. It's not always going to be a social behavior, right? But at the end of the day, anytime you can try to reinforce that value within your children, the more likely it is that they will internalize that from you.
And one more piece to think about before we're going to move on to the next piece of this is that as they grow older, the people that we know who have a real social heart, those who feel a sense of care and empathy towards others or whatever, are also the people we probably trust the most. And so I think that one thing to think of as a parent here is that as you're helping your child develop an altruistic identity, what you're doing there is that as they grow older, others around them will sense that that really is a big piece of who they are, and they're more trustworthy because of that, right? Because they're not necessarily out repeatedly for selfish reasons, but people see that they really want to do good things for others. So that's just kind of a capstone on one other reason why we do this.
Right. And I think Dr. Borba does point out that this is really hard because, as we talked about last week, we are within this all about me world. All the other kids' parents are going to get them a trophy for winning the soccer game. Your kid might not, because at the end of the day, winning the soccer game is not as important as being a good teammate or picking up the kid who's down, right? And that, I think, can be really hard for parents and for kids when you see every other kid get a cookie for making C honor roll. Back in my day, C honor roll wasn't a thing. B honor roll. It was like, if you don't have a 3.5, see ya. Wouldn't want to be ya. Right? Like, you think about the way we've changed how even our society and our systems are praise, 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 praise for things like Jim said, that are mostly out of our kids' control. If they study really hard and still fail the test, they failed the test, right? Even if they studied really hard, we can't change that as parents or teachers. So I think it's really important to think about, as parents, give yourself time and grace and think more about the why, the broader perspective. And, remember that you're just trying to instill these core values in your kids, even when the rest of society is still kind of saying, like, everybody gets a trophy at the end of the soccer game. And so with that can kind of come difficulties for not only you as a parent, but also for kids, as they have to stand up for their beliefs and their values and the things, I'm a kind person, I'm a giving person, I'm a caring person, in a world where that may not always be valued. And your kids may see you struggling with this as you say, no, you don't get $5 allowance for doing no chores, right? So just as important as instilling these values is teaching your children how to stand up for their beliefs, and the fact that it's important to be firm and not to let others topple over you or tell you that your values and your beliefs are not important. Because if we instill these moral values and we instill these ethical beliefs in our kids, but the first time they're challenged, they fall right over, well, what good is that? We didn't really do very much. So it's important to help your kids feel empowered by these things, by sharing with them your own why. Why am I praising you for being a good friend? Why is it important that you try even when it's hard? And then kind of instilling these nonverbal cues to help people see that they're not going to just bend at the will. Dr. Borba kind of talks about teaching your kids to be firm, to stand up, right? To learn to say no when someone challenges them, and to leave, and to say that you will always support them if they come into a situation where their values are being pushed or questioned and they need to leave. Your child, that you're like, let's say, for example, your child is in theater, they're at a theater party, they're 14 years old, and all of a sudden, they have a very important value that they won't consume alcohol until they're 21, right? Pretty common value. And kids are saying, drink, drink, drink. You may be really upset that your kid is at this party or that they are in a situation that's not safe. But as a parent trying to instill these values, if you get upset with your child for calling you, you may be sending the message that it's better to not tell me than to tell me you're in a sticky situation, stand up for your beliefs, and I'm going to be there to support you when you feel like someone's challenging you. I don't know if you want to speak to that.
Well, no, I was just thinking about that. I was thinking what, in essence, we're trying to teach our kids is to have an internal fortitude for things that matter more than what's in front of them, right? And that is really hard. I mean, I think you and I would both say, I look back to my high school years, especially, and think, gosh, there were a number of times I wished I had been more courageous and standing up for others and just doing things that, not just being a bystander the way I was. And I think that one of the keys here, there's probably two big keys we're saying, is that as you're helping them establish more of a sense of identity and this internal fortitude, it's that I myself, we as your parents, I as your parent, really want you to know that we appreciate and praise and look out for that, even when you don't feel others might be supporting that, right? And that's hard, because if you don't have the support and you don't have the sense of feeling good about doing something because it's the right thing, then it's hard to kind of, like you said, stand up for whatever. But we can provide that support for our kids, and we want to, especially in an age where there's a lot of pressures there.
And I think that's it's different than not having consequences for your child who makes a poor decision or doesn't necessarily do something that's right or aligns with their values or is legal, for example. But what it shows, and I'll kind of share something from my own life, and that my parents kind of did this when I was in high school. They were like, you are in high school, you are getting autonomy, but you don't have it even though you want it. You're going to do things that probably will get you into trouble. Number one, we're always going to pick you up. You call us, we're picking you up. We're always going to pick you up and not yell at you. We won't make a scene. We'll come get you. And the next day, we'll talk about it. You don't get out of it. It's not a free pass. But we also know that what we don't want is for you to feel like you don't have a support system when you're still trying to develop who you are as a person. And seeing your parents have a moral code and be open about that and why that's important, it models to your children, that exact process.
I said to my son recently, this is over the past year, whatever, I was talking to one of my older sons about the idea of, you know, I remain your parent. And like you said, even as teenagers, there are things that I really have to kind of exert my authority appropriately. But I told my son recently, I said, what I want to be more and more is an advocate for you as you're growing up to be able to make the choices that you need to make. And for you to know that, again, even if you make the wrong choice or you have a difficult situation, that I am there really to be kind of, in essence, a mentor, an advocate as your parent. And it was interesting because that conversation, I think at first, my son's like, what do you, what, are you really mean that? And I was like, look, I really mean that. When you're younger, you think of me as a parent who just tells you the things you should do and why, whatever. But as we're older, it's kind of like what we're talking about here, Jamie, is we want to walk alongside, especially our teenagers and young adults, and to say, look, you in the end of the day are going to make the decisions you make increasingly, right? But I want to be your advocate. I want to be an advocate for you establishing the moral identity and who you want to be. And understand, I really liked what was neat what your parents said about how they would handle those situations, because we need to be intentional about those kind of conversations there.
And I think it's a developmental approach, right? You're not going to tell your 5-year-old, hey, call me if you're
Right.
ever in a tough
Right.
situation, right? That is definitely something that comes as you, as a parent, understand where your own child is. But that may be something like, okay, I have several clients where I have parents in my office who say, if my child were to be in a fight at school, I would always tell them to fight back. I would tell them that they're not supposed to start a fight, but they're always allowed to fight back. Okay, everyone may have a different opinion about why, whether that's good or bad. But regardless of that, I think what's more important is having a conversation with your child about why or why not are we fighting back? When are we taking the opportunity to exit? And how is that related to our value? And so that's, maybe for younger kids, in terms of parents backing their children's decision making, is more along the lines of what you would think might happen in elementary or middle school: peer arguments, somebody got pushed down at the playground, somebody stole my, fidget out of my desk, those kinds of things, and how your kid is problem solving. Again, it starts with that emotion identification. Billy stole your fidget. How do you feel? Okay. What does your, moral code tell you about stealing? Okay. It's wrong. You feel sad, but is punching Billy going to be an appropriate decision? And we'll get there in this series, but we're kind of laying those pieces out. And so kind of the last thing that Dr. Borba talks about in this chapter is this idea of coming together as a family to create a mission, a mantra for your family, a way that you and your partner, your children, any other important person in your child's life can help reinforce this idea of what's important to your family. It will look different for every family. It will look different potentially based on your children. But essentially, the goal is to outline the core values of your family and what you want your kids to live out every day and what you want to live out every day. So you may talk about behaviors in this. You may say, we are kind, we are generous, we are upstanding, whatever those things are. But the goal is to tie it back to how you want your kids to live their life, and then to use it every day. So you may snap at one of your kids and say, I said enough, go to bed. Then maybe later you might say, I wasn't living out our mantra of being respectful, right? And that wasn't respectful and I'm sorry. Or your kid may do something to a sibling. okay, how is that, related or not to our family value of respect and kindness, right? So those are the conversations that really can help shape this, regardless of what age your kids are, and helps create a sense of shared kind of connectedness within the family, that we are all people who exhibit these values.
And this all can be a humbling process sometimes when you're acknowledging, like you said, the things that didn't quite live up to our own values. But I've increasingly found as our kids have gotten older that the hidden opportunity for us is not just what we're trying to impart on our kids about who they're becoming, but our own ability to kind of reflect back on ourselves and say, who am I becoming too? Like, I there's been many times where there's a part of you that just wants to rise up in anger in regards to what your kids are doing, or kind of just react in certain ways. But I think the hidden opportunity that we're really getting around to too is just the neat thing about us seeing who we're becoming, not just who our kids are. And when you start to find value in that, it's kind of a cool thing. It's kind of neat to see that that's a shared value. And I like that idea that she has of that family mantra there.
Yeah. I think my family didn't have one, but I think it would have been interesting to think as a child what that would have looked like. And I think how it probably could have made things easier in some situations for sure. Um, Not that I didn't have a great childhood, but so the bottom line is basically that we can have a child who has great moral reasoning. We can have a child who's got emotion literacy, can identify their feelings, but that doesn't guarantee that they're going to be altruistic. It doesn't guarantee that they're going to be caring or kind. It's important that we instill in our children that that's who they are. And that starts with how we talk to them and what we emphasize in them. So, again, as we always kind of say, this is a moving target. This is something that you as parents have to negotiate all day, every day within your own self, your own emotions, your own becoming who you are as a parent. So give yourself grace, but find those opportunities to see those values coming out in your kids and really, really reinforce that. Make an effort toward trying to see those things. And as we wrap up, I think as we talked about last week, if you were able to kind of implement some of the things we talked about, always remember your why. Why am I doing this? Because I want my child to be empathetic. I want them to be successful. I don't want them to go to their university professor and ask for an extension because got busy on Minecraft, right? We don't want our kids to do that. We want them to have all of these wonderful characteristics. And then think about what is a reasonable goal for you to set for yourself. And it might just start with reflection on your own life and your own, what are my values, right? That's something we may not ask ourselves. And then think about how you're instilling that in your kids moving forward.
Sounds like a great ending. Yeah, at the end of the day, I mean, again, all these are great opportunities as we grow. And like you said, it's not as if there's one target. Life shifts and we're looking at our own values. But as we get more and more excited about seeing our kids grow, so I think our families are growing too.
Absolutely. Well, that's all I have for today.
Yep, I think we are right at time right now. So thanks again for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you next week for the third installment. So I hope everybody has a great day. Thank
Yes.
you.
Do you want to stop the